Welcome to another edition of Turn 6 Garage, and today I'm driving the 2018 Holden Commodore RS station wagon. Now, the Commodore was an Australian nameplate since 1978. The Commodore was produced locally between 1978 and 2017. And in late 2017, Holden sourced the Opel Insignia, or Vauxhall Insignia, to replace the Commodore and badge it as a Commodore, which in some ways pays homage to the original Commodore, which was based off an Opel anyway. So, what is this car like? It's got big shoes to fill, having replaced how many generations of Australian Commodores. And first impressions when you sit in it is it's a different place. Very different place to what you're used to if you're used to driving a VE, VF, VY, VZ, Commodore. Very different place. Feels a bit like a Vectra, funnily enough, because it kind of is one. It's in that bloodline anyway. Now in this car, it's powered by a 2-litre turbocharged inline 4-cylinder Ecotec engine. And for a little 4-cylinder engine, it's got a lot of go. Certainly pulls well. The engine is quite powerful. It's got good acceleration, particularly in the mid-range it's really good, which is like many turbo 4-cylinder engines. And overall, as a 4-cylinder engine, as an engine, it's just very, very good. It's not the most refined engine in the world. It is a little whiny and a little coarse, but the engine itself is actually pretty good. However, what can't be said is so good is the suspension. It's too bouncy. First impressions when you drive it over any rough kind of road, it's just coarse and bouncy and it just lacks composure. The older Holden setups had a lot more composure than this. It just feels very jittery and it doesn't feel planted, which is one of the biggest criticisms I have of this car. The rear end, I can tell where the front and rear are, but I don't really know what they're going to do next. It does certainly go well, and the turn-in isn't too bad either, but on high-speed corners it feels okay. On the low-speed stuff, that feeling isn't replicated. It feels mushy at low speeds, yet in high speeds it feels relatively well planted in terms of turn-in, but again the suspension's a bit icky, although this specific example isn't the nicest example out there, so maybe there might be something to that. But on 80 km/h road, it's really good. The engine's pretty good. It feels reasonably solid at speed, which isn't a surprise. This car is a German car made for Germany, and it clearly shows. But just that suspension. The brakes are okay, but the thing I'm not particularly fond of is just not especially fond of the build on this car. Quality, the interior, all the buttons feel, again, they don't feel substantial. They feel kind of flimsy to a point. It feels like almost every other GM product. It certainly has that same underdone feel to it. It just doesn't feel like a solid car. A lot of the modern GM passenger cars have this same flimsy type feeling. You feel like when you're sitting in a Korean or a Japanese car, they feel like they're better finished and they feel like there's better quality to it. However, one thing I can say is good, sound system's good, air conditioning, apart from the whine this thing has, actually is quite good. The systems itself and the interface, even though some things feel a little cheap, the interface with all the systems is actually pretty well placed. Controls on the steering wheel, controls are relatively intuitive. It's not bad if you're going to be sitting in this car for a long time driving it. If you are, might I suggest you get a better set of tyres. this car isn't on the best set of tyres either, so this car would improve if you did put a set of Continentals or Michelins on it. But that suspension. Now, currently, for a 4-cylinder RS like this, 45,000 k's, you're looking at about roughly $25,000. And for the package you get, it's quite worth thinking about. It's worth paying it a visit. But the thing that really seems to annoy me is the Wagon has a case for itself given its space, although things do roll around the back. It does have quite a lot of space in there. The sedan, on the other hand, I'd buy a Camry. Camry just feels like a better car. That hybrid Camry I drove feels like a better car than this. It just needs a bit more. Just things that we loved about those cars, it's just not there. I know why people didn't buy these though. If you had an old Commodore, you drove this, you'd think, why bother? Keep my old car. And that's what my sentiment is. If I want a Commodore, heck, I'd rebuild the timing chain on an Alloy Tech before I'd buy this. It's just not... Calling it a Commodore to me is... if you called it an Insignia, I wouldn't have that expectation that I'd have for a Commodore. And given that Holden is no longer, and backup's going to be an interesting affair to say the least, your ability to keep this thing on the road is something else you need to think about. If you're willing to source your own parts, this actually isn't a bad car because the parts are all Vauxhall Opel and you can get them all from Europe. However, if you're not in that boat, you're reliant on Holden to give you backup. Not sure that's going to be the case. It's... in terms of what these are worth, in terms of what these are, for the package you get, it's a car worth thinking about. But would it put me off buying a Mazda 6 Wagon or a Subaru Liberty or even a sedan form in a Camry? No. I'd buy the Mazda or the Subaru before I'd buy this. I'd also probably be keener on buying a Peugeot over this. Having driven this and having driven a couple of Peugeots, I do believe that I'd contemplate buying a 508 Wagon over this car, because the 508 at least is a nice car to drive, and there's better backup behind it given Peugeot will still be here and Holden no more. And that's quite ironic to say that, because I would never have thought I'd say a Peugeot was better supported than a Holden. It's what happens when a car manufacturer ends local manufacturing and is desperately finding cars to fill its lineup with, and they just grab anything that's in the pool of their parent company. And this is one of them. The Astra was there, Trax was already there, Equinox, Acadia. Any of these Holdens of that vintage, how do you think they're going to go in terms of backup? There's just too many plastic cheap lines under the bonnet, there's too many cheap parts, just, you know, at some point it's going to go boom. And that's not something you want on a modern car. So it's sad though. I really wanted to like this thing. I like the look of it. The styling is something I really like. The interior design isn't too bad. In many ways, it is quite sad to drive this. It's the car that Australia gave up. Well, Holden pulled out. Car that we gave up, the manufacturing industry we gave up, made better cars than this. There were better built Commodores than this one. This just doesn't feel like... I'd think about it as a car, but if I had to ask something that's going to last the course, you better bet's in a Japanese car. Although, there are a lot of positives about this car. The space is really good. Seats are a little tight though, but driving position isn't too bad, and the rear seat space is pretty good. The boot's pretty good. Practically, the Wagon is a good car. In terms of practicality, in terms of space, it's really good in this area. It's also really good in the area of equipment. You get quite a lot for your money in this car. You get all manner of safety features as you do with most modern cars. You get all your infotainment stuff. It's aimed at the Camry area, and it misses. The Camry is just a better car. And you don't see these being driven around as Ubers either, or taxis. Makes you think, why is that the case? And you can get one with the 3.6 litre engine, and I would say don't, because the 3.6, yes, the VXR will be more powerful. I would like to drive it, but I really wouldn't want to own the 3.6 Allotech and its wonderful timing chain issues. So in terms of reliability, your best bet's probably this 2 litre 4-cylinder. But the amount of cheap parts and cheap plastics make me think that there's a bit of a complaint here. And this backup thing, one of the cars I've sold was to somebody who had a Holden. I'm not going to tell you which one, but he had a Holden. And he told me, I'm only buying this car because I can't be certain the Holden will be backed up. Right. So, the thing that would put me off buying this the most, if I wasn't into getting my own parts, is having to rely on a manufacturer that isn't there in the capacity it once was, and it to stock and provide parts. You can see what I mean by that. It's a question mark at best, how they'll be backed up. Some dealers are pretty good, others not so much. So it all depends on who it is. And we are driving past what was a former Holden dealer, now sells MGs. And seems to be doing quite well out of selling MGs, hitting the market. The MGs seem to be where a lot of Holden dealers have gone to. They've gone into other franchises. And those other franchises, naturally, take up a lot more of their attention. So, considering how much work they'll have with Holden, it's unsure as to how well this servicing is. I'd like to know, I mean, anyone, if you have a Holden and you do use the Holden certified service, what is it like? Is it like a dealer service, or is it sort of like a quasi-independent with a bit more support?